as McCain is talking about his experiences as a POW, he tells Rick Warren of the time when he was being held prisoner of war, and they were treating him particularly cruelly, and at one point they had him tied up really tight after going through a great deal of abuse. And one night, one of the prisoners, the gun guard, came in and actually loosened his ropes a little bit and let him get a little bit of relief that night. And then at the end of his watch, he came and tightened the ropes again so nobody could tell. But he never said anything, and he never did anything at the time. And later, when it was Christmas in 1969, that same guard, again without smiling or saying anything or any acknowledgement, came up to McCain, according to McCain's story here that he told Rick Warren, and with his sandal he drew a cross in the sand, and then looked at McCain, and then they looked at the cross for a while. Now this is on Christmas, and then he wiped the cross away with his sandal and walked away. Now it's a story so subtle and so believable because, one, why would you dispute it? I mean, the guy's at a POW camp. I could totally see this happening. It's very, very powerful, and it has some details that make it seem like, how would anybody make that up? And why would anybody make that up, right? So I've heard that story a couple of times. In fact, the reason I heard it is because McCain ran an ad about it. In fact, we showed you that ad earlier, a bunch of months ago on the Young Turks, and I thought, wow, that's a powerful ad. That's a great ad by McCain. That's when he was introducing himself to the public, and he ran an ad called Christmas. And he talked about how the guy drew this cross in the sand, and it made him realize that, hey, you know, don't worry, persevere. We're all Christians, and you're going to make this through this terrible ordeal fine, because you have to have the power of faith, etc. It's a great, great story. Here's the only problem. Apparently, he made it up. Now, how would we even know that? How do we know if there's a guard in Vietnam and what happened? Well, there's a number of details that convince me that, in fact, he did make it up. So, one is that he copied it. I'm going to get to that in a second. Okay, and the copy is devastating. But let's understand a couple of background things first. When McCain came back from Vietnam, he wrote a 12,000-word description of what happened to him in Vietnam. And he talked about religion. He talked about his ordeals. He even talked about a guard that let him lie down for a couple hours. Now, this was a different kind of torture they were doing to him. And understand this, McCain was tortured throughout. So he went through a lot as a POW. So he doesn't need to make anything up, okay? What he went through already was amazing and heroic, okay? And in the real story, the one he explains right after he came back, they had been making him stand up for a long, long time. And in fact, in one bizarre ritual, they had him sit down for a long time. And apparently that was painful as well. Now remember, these are some of the same stress positions we used in Guantanamo Bay, at Abu Ghraib, and at Bagram Air Base, and throughout Iraq and Afghanistan. So he's in excruciating pain. He's standing this whole time, and the good guard, the gun guard, came in and let him lie down for a couple hours. And he said in his account back then, when he came back, that was the only good human being he'd ever met from the North Vietnamese side during his, his detention, which makes all the sense in the world. Okay, the only good human being he'd ever met, never mentioned anything about a cross, right? All right, so far I think, okay, he left it out in that huge description. No big deal. He never mentions the cross again until 1999. Never mentions it in all that time. What a powerful and amazing story. And all of a sudden, for the first time, the story changes from the guy letting him lie down for a couple hours to a guy loosening his ropes for a couple hours. So why that change happened, I don't know. Remember earlier there was a change of, he always said that he would recite the Green Bay Packers offensive line as to who was in his unit. And this year he changed it to the Pittsburgh defensive line when he was in Pittsburgh. These bizarre changes don't make any sense, right? Now Mark Salter is a guy who wrote the 2000 book with him. And Mark Salter is on his campaign. He's also wrote an editorial together praising the great Soviet dissident Solzhenitsyn, right? So they've talked about and McCain has written an editorial. He's written parts of a book saying how great Solzhenitsyn is, right? Well, it's interesting because it turns out Solzhenitsyn, in his book that was released in 1973 about his experiences in the Gulag, had an incredibly similar story about a man who showed him a cross etched in the dirt that changed his life around. In fact, I'll quote it for you right now. Solzhenitsyn writes, "As he waited, head down, he felt a presence. Slowly, he looked up and saw a skinny old prisoner squat down beside him. The man said nothing. Instead, he used a stick to trace in the dirt the sign of the cross. The man then got back up and returned to his work. As Solzhenitsyn stared at the cross drawn in the dirt, his entire perspective changed. He knew he was only one man against the all-powerful Soviet Empire, yet he knew there was something greater than the evil he saw in the prison camp, something greater than the Soviet Union. He knew that hope for all people was represented by that simple cross. Through the power of the cross, anything was possible." Now, McCain says he's read Solzhenitsyn. He's praised Solzhenitsyn in great detail. And he didn't think, wow, isn't that amazing that we both have that cross story about a guy who draws a cross in the dirt? That never occurred to him. And when he finally did write the story about the cross in 1999, he didn't think, wow, isn't that amazing that my hero had the same story he wrote back in 1973? Who believes this, man? This is very telling about John McCain's character.